the mission boundaries right now are, like, I think it's 10 zones on the coast, and then there's one zone in the mountains called Huaraz. But this year, when the Trujillo South mission opens, they'll be taking back Huaraz to the Trujillo South mission. And so Lima West consists of, like, the northern coast, even though it's called Lima West. And so, let's see, to get from top to bottom, from Barranca to, like, Lima, in Las Palmeras, where, like, the mission home is, it's like a 6 to 8 hour bus ride. And so you have a good majority of the zones are in Lima itself. And so, yeah, there's 6 or 7 in Lima, and then there's 3 that are up north. And so there are just these 3 little, like, coastal towns with little pueblitos off to the side. And so, yeah, there's not a temple in our mission, which is unfortunate, but there's a temple that's like 2 hours away. And so, occasionally you get to go, depending upon the circumstances and the mission president. It's really cool. The stakes are really thriving there. There are definitely some parts where I served in a part that definitely was it felt very new to the gospel still. Like, the gospel had just barely been introduced there, and they were still trying to get, like, a base population of members that would be faithful and stay faithful to the church. And so then there are other stakes who have, the oldest stakes in Peru are beginning to have, like, 3-generation families where the grandparents, the parents, and now the kids have all been members. But 4 generations is rare. Very, very rare. And so in that sense, Peru's still pretty new to the church and still maturing and learning in a lot of ways. But it's wonderful.
Chiclayo mission is in the north part of Peru. I'm from Lima. And in this part of Peru, the places are really warm. Chiclayo is really warm, especially in summer. Spring, summer is warm. There are many people. The people in there is really humble. They are really good people. They love to be gentlemen with every people. They have respect for each other. And the history of the church in Peru is great. Now we are gonna have 3 temples. We have 1 temple in Lima, but Chiclayo is special because it was created like 3 years ago. We received half part of the Piura mission and Trujillo mission, and Chiclayo have a really good geography. We have warmer places, we have cold places, for example Cajamarca or Jaén and Chiclayo, and this is a huge mission, I think, and it is a blessing if you can go to there and you can talk with people from Chiclayo, from Cajamarca, from Jaén. They are really humble and they are waiting just an opportunity to hear about the gospel.
The mission Chiclayo, the city of Chiclayo, is on the Pacific coast of Peru. And because the Andes Mountains kind of cuts down in the middle of the country, the way the weather patterns there work makes it that the coastal side is the dry side. So that's the desert side of the country. And that's where about 80% of the mission is. It's in the city of Chiclayo, the suburbs of that city, and some surrounding cities that are fairly close to it, that are all in this fairly desert-like region. But because the ocean is close enough there, it usually maintains things fairly cool. Never gets much hotter than about 95 degrees, maybe up to 100 degrees on some days, but never gets much colder than about the 50s. It'll get breezy because especially the closer you are to the ocean, it'll get breezy, so bring a nice enough jacket. And that's about 80% of the mission, but as you go farther out towards the east, there are some areas that are in the mountains. One is called Cajamarca. Very, very beautiful place. I never had the opportunity myself to go, but I went somewhere similar called Jaén. And those regions will be much colder when you're up in the mountains, or if you're in Jaén and some of them more getting towards the jungle side, it will get very, very hot. And you'll get a very nice suntan. That's the general geography of the mission. The majority of it in by the coast, around the city of Chiclayo, and then less and less as it expands outward. over the last couple of years, especially when I was there, the mission president was very focused on expansion. And over the time we were there, we doubled the number of missionaries that were serving in the mission. We doubled the number of areas that were available and open. And there have been a lot of opening of new branches, of new family groups, a whole bunch of new units. They've been very focused on expanding the mission there. For food-wise, don't worry, it's delicious. But get used to a lot of rice, because that's something that a lot of missionaries there, especially that come from North America, they're used to more of a wheat grains-based diet, eating lots of bread. It's not going to happen so much in Peru, because the grain that gets cultivated there a lot more is rice. And so every meal, even sometimes for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner, rice will be a part of that meal. Especially if a family you're visiting is somewhat poorer or not as well economically advantaged, they might serve you just a plate of rice, and that'll be what's there on your plate. So try some if you can. You'll get used to it, and it's pretty good. Because Chiclayo is in a region that's very close to the ocean, there's a lot of seafood there, and it is delicious. Lots of different, very fresh types of fish, rays. There's one of the favorite plates that I love to get there. It was called La Tortilla de Rey. No, La Tortilla de Raya, that's what it was called, which is essentially an omelet, but made with the meat of a manta ray, and it is really, really good. It's a fairly common dish around the more coastal regions. But once you start getting out towards the mountains, fish becomes a little less common, but then other larger meats become more common, especially goat, which is very, very delicious. They'll usually make that with a little bit of beans, side of rice. They'll spice it very well, and it is absolutely delicious. Because in the Peru Chiclayo mission, you're not going to drive and you're not going to ride bicycles. Largely because a lot of the streets are not paved, they're just going to be dirt streets, so that's terrible on a bicycle, especially if it's not built for that sort of thing. And the mission doesn't own any vehicles, so you're not going to be driving. So you're going to be relying on walking most places or on public transportation. And when it comes to public transportation, you usually have a handful of options. If you're going semi-short distance, like from wherever you are in your area, apparently you have an appointment that would be a half-hour walk away from where you are. If you want to get there quickly, you can call a moto taxi, which is essentially a motorcycle that the back half of it has been cut off, replaced with two other wheels, and then it has a board essentially sitting on top of it and has a nice enclosure in it that keeps it all in there. And you essentially pay the guy that's driving for you, tell him where you want to go, you get in the back and off he goes. And you're just sitting in the back almost chariot style, and it's a lot of fun. But it can be very hectic because traffic regulations are not as strict as they are here, and so he's going to go wherever he needs to go in order to get you where you're going quickly. So be ready to get a little bumped around, but they're never going to take any risk that's going to threaten your life. It's going to be a new feeling, not having a seatbelt, not being in a completely enclosed space, and going very, very quickly. But then going a little bit beyond that, usually when you have to travel between towns, you can either get a taxi, which is more expensive, but generally tends to be a little bit faster and a little bit safer. Or you can take another public transportation, which is essentially a big old 15-passenger van. It's called a combi. And they'll pack these 15-passenger vans with about 20 or more people in them, so sometimes it can be a little bit of a cramped space, but they tend to be less expensive, and they will follow a certain route. And so depending on where your area is, where you are, you'll know whether or not you have to be taking them or how often. And they also tend to be very safe, but they can be a little uncomfortable, especially if you're very tall, because most of the vehicles are designed for people that are about in the upper 5-foot region, so you might be a little bit cramped up in there. But it's something that'll be getting used to.
So the Peru Cusco mission, as far as I know, as it was 3 years ago, could possibly have changed by now, consisted of 4 districts, like a state, which are Cusco, Puno, Madre de Dios, and Abancay. So there's those 4 districts of Peru in the mission. I believe there were about 11 zones, maybe 12, and each of those had 6 to 7 districts. this mission is based in Cusco. When I was there were 2 stakes in Cusco. I think there's a third now. It's growing rapidly. And then Puno had 2 stakes, I think, in the main city. I think Madre de Dios just had the 1, and then Abancay just had the 1, I think. I spent most of my time in Cusco, so I know Cusco really well. The other areas I did go to, but not as much. The closest temple when I was there was the Cochabamba, Bolivia temple, or the Lima temple, depending on which side of the mission you were on. Now, they're building the Arequipa temple in Arequipa, which is only 5 hours from Cusco. Before, it was a 24-hour bus drive to either temple, Lima or Cochabamba. And they're building another temple in Lima, and they're just finishing one up north in Trujillo. But that's way far away. So the mission, like geography, I'd say 3/4 of it is mountainous. You spend, depending on where you are, you're well above 8,000 feet. That's where all the people live. And then we do have 2 areas that are jungle, and they're near sea level. So most of the time it's cold and dry, except in the rainy season, and then it rains every day. And they have a joke down there that if you're in the sun, you get burned, and if you're in the shade, you get burned, because it's so cold. And it's true. You can be outside in the middle of the day, melting in the sun or freezing in the shade. That's just the way it is. Religiously, the people are very Catholic. It was always interesting to see their like parades and idol worship. They would have like statues or kind of like floats, but carried by hand, of Virgin Mary. They have a big festival in Puno, La Virgen de la Candelaria. It's like a month-long craziness. There's a portion of it where the missionaries aren't even allowed to leave their homes because it's insane. But as for the members are very faithful. I had the opportunity to serve in, it wasn't a district, it was a family group about an hour outside of Cusco. So they were kind of like, a family group is a break off of a ward, basically. They don't have a branch president, they have a bishop, but the bishop is so far away that he really doesn't influence them at all. So at the time I was the district leader, and so I was in charge of this family group, with me and 3 other missionaries. And that's always a fun experience because you really get to know the members a lot, and spend most of your time with the members as you're, working to build up a family group, this small unit of the church, and delegate responsibilities and teach members. Most of these members were baptized in the last 5-10 years, and really don't know that much about the gospel. But I think it was the last week I was in Urcos, The we found a family that was a member that hadn't been coming to church for a long time because they didn't think there was any church nearby. But the last week I was there, he was put in as the family group leader, freeing the missionaries from that responsibility, but with the understanding that we still need to help out a lot in that position. So by now, 3 years ago, I mean, that could be a branch, maybe even a ward. There's a ton of growth. Unfortunately, not a lot of retention. Lots of people are baptized, but then they don't stay in the church or stay active. And it's getting better as we work more with the members, teaching with them and really focusing on making sure there's a pass-off from the missionaries to the members. When I was there, a lot of our baptisms were young children or like teenagers, and most of the time they don't stay with the church for lots of reasons. The few converts that I baptized and that have stayed in the church were families, couples specifically. And the problem there is most people in Peru and South America aren't married. They live together, they have 3, 6 kids, but they've never legally been married. And I remember we were teaching a family, and there had been like 6 couples of missionaries before us that had been teaching the same family, but they weren't married. Normally, missionaries would drop them after a while if they weren't going to get married. But for some reason, they had kept this couple. So I, learned their story, and the problem was the sister had been born in this really, really small town, like I think it was 3 or 4 hours away, like up in the hills, like nowhere near civilization. And in order to get married, you had to have a birth certificate. So after a while, my companion and I, we got permission to go to this remote, I don't even know what it's called, place out in the middle of nowhere. We figured out we could take a bus here and to this place and then get on a different bus and go out there, and there's only one bus that comes back, so you'll have to spend the rest of the day there. But we went and got there, and luckily the guy gave us the birth certificate. We didn't even know if he would, because we weren't her. But he did. And then we came back. We spent the whole day. That's all we did that day. While we were there, we did some tracting, but probably didn't get much out of that. But then we came back, and that couple got married. We put the paperwork together, got everything we needed, and planned a wedding and married them and baptized them. And they are still my most faithful converts. That couple and their 3 or 4 kids or so. So it's worth it. It takes a lot of work. Sometimes it's not that extreme. But getting the couples to actually get married, even if they've been living together for a year or 30 years. That's a challenge, to get them married legally, and then to get them baptized, and a goal set to go to the temple. I would definitely focus more on having a good relationship with my companions. They weren't always the best. I had a few really awesome ones, and I actually had a lot of companions. Not always my fault. Not usually my fault. And some of these companions were coming off of emergency transfers and had been doing not so good things and were sometimes difficult to deal with. But all you can do is love them and listen to them and try and understand. If you don't communicate with your companion, there's no way the Spirit can be with you. So I would definitely focus more on that, and teaching wise, I would definitely try and work more with families. Like I said, a lot of the youth that you baptize don't stay in the church. And I wish there was a way to fix that, but I don't know of any way. And the most success I had was with families. Baptizing a mom and a dad and whatever kids they may have. Or I even had one family that was just a mom and her kids, and I believe they're still faithful as well. So I served in the Peru Cusco mission. I served in Cusco twice, in a little city, Urcos. I served in Andahuaylas. I served in Quillabamba, Juliaca, Puno. I think that's it.
Well, the Peru Iquitos mission is very special. The city of Iquitos itself is actually an island in the middle of the Amazon River. You can only get to it by plane or boat. So if you get a transfer, you're likely to fly there to your new area. It's all in the Amazon jungle. So it's amazing. It's beautiful. The church history is really special as well. In the island of Iquitos, there used to be 5 stakes, and now there are only 3. So there are basically 2 entire stakes worth of less active members, of people who once had a testimony and have lost that. So one of the best parts of missionary work is actually working with those people and finding them. And one of the blessings of finding people who haven't gone to church for a long time is they already know a lot of things, so you get to kind of like reignite that fire within them. But also that means that they've been associating with people that haven't gone to church in a long time or that aren't members. So as you work with the less actives, you find a lot of people that aren't members of the church, and you're able to teach them, and so they grow as their friends who are less active grow, and it's such a special experience. A lot of the baptisms that we had were because of the less actives that we found and worked with. In the other parts of Iquitos, in Tarapoto, they were a district when I was there, but they just barely became a stake, which is awesome. There was so much work that went into that for a lot of years. And then there's also a place called Pucallpa that I served in that had 1 stake, and it was a pretty strong stake. It was really impressive. The work really varies depending on where you are. You can be in the same city or even the same stake in a different area, and it's going to be completely different. One of the focuses of our mission, the mission logo, was actually a picture of a temple in the jungle. And that's what the people want. It is so heartbreaking to see how badly these people want a temple. They'll travel on the river for several days just to be able to go to the temple, and most of them don't have the money to do that. And so it's such a blessing to have that focus. Our focus is to build this church up to the point where it can have a temple, and these people can have the blessings that so many of us have, of having a temple that we can go to at any time, really. So most of the people there belong to some sort of church. There's a lot of Christianity. There are churches like on every corner, and they're all different religions. And I remember my companion, my trainer, would talk about how hard it was to talk to people because they thought they already had the truth because they worshiped God and they thought all the churches were the same. So she'd always hold up one hand and the other one and say, you know, the churches are like the fingers on my hand. If my other hand was God, they're all pointing at him, but only one can reach. And that was one of the main focuses, is to teach them the restored gospel, to get them to understand that it is the exact same church that Jesus Christ himself established when he was on the earth. A lot of the people are going to accept what you say, but they're not going to understand why it's different from the other churches. So that's an important thing to focus on. It's also important to focus on really converting people. I think in all missions, but especially this mission, it's really easy to baptize people. I felt like I could baptize just about anyone, but actually converting them is a process. And I think that's why there are so many less actives there, is because a lot of people were baptized without being converted. But if you focus on the conversion, obviously baptism is a part of that, so it'll come with it. So I began my mission in March of 2013, and I got back in September of 2014. I served in Tarapoto in the branch Chilcayo, and then I served in Iquitos in the stake 9 de Octubre, and I served in 2 different wards. One was called Internacional and one was called 9 de Octubre as well. And then I served in Pucallpa, which is a city and a stake, and I also served in the ward Pucallpa in that stake.
So in the Lima East mission, before it split, while I was there, the mission split into 2 different missions, which is kind of a testimony of how much growth is happening there with the church right now. But when I was there, we had part of the capital city of Lima, and then all the way through the Andes Mountains and towards the eastern border with Brazil, so parts of the jungle. And the church within my mission mostly were wards. We had one district with branches, which was one of the zones. But mostly they were small wards most of the time, but had been established to be wards and stakes. The church has been growing a lot since kind of in this past, I'd say 10 years or so. And it was really great for me to be there at the time I was, because we saw so many new things happen. They had only had one temple in Lima, and while I was there they announced 2 more, one in the north and one in the south, which is huge for the people because they would have to caravan from, you know, the most northern provinces and come down all the way to Lima, and that was, you know, really hard for the people to have, you know, save up that money and to be able to come down and participate in the temple ordinances, which is, you know, something amazing and wonderful, but just really hard for the people. So having a temple closer to them in the north and one in the south kind of divides it up and allows for a lot more people to have access to the temple now. And then as well, when I was there, they created the 100th stake, which I believe Peru is the 3rd or 4th country in the world to do that. I think it's, not including the U.S., I think it's Mexico and Brazil and then Peru. And that was awesome. It happened to be in one of the areas that I had worked in. It split that stake, and that was really awesome because I felt like I was able to have maybe a small portion of aiding in that growth in that area, and so yeah, the church is very strong there. It has its challenges, just like any other country, with the, with inactives and trying to maintain the work and maintain the members. But it's really seen a lot of growth lately. The church hasn't been there for that long. I think in the 50s or 60s is really when the church started to actually kind of pick up there. And the temple was constructed in the 80s. And I know that was a really big thing that the early members of the church worked towards, donated a lot of money so that the temple could be built. And those early members of the church, I've had opportunities to talk with some of them, because most of those ones kind of live around the temple, because that's where the biggest concentration of members was at the time as well. So, they've told me about, just working to get the temple built, and how they were just a handful of members in the beginning, and they've seen it grow from a ward and two wards in the city of Lima to tons of stakes now, and it's pretty amazing. But
Peru has grown as far as member-wise, just tremendously. In fact, when I was there was only one temple. It was just the Lima temple, which is right next to the MTC, which was nice. But and now there's, I believe, 3 or 4 temples. That's bad, I don't know. But it's just grown, and I could tell that just, fresh getting into the mission. It was just like, it seems every day we would either run into people or had appointments to go to. It's just, that's how we proselyted, is just walked up to random people or knocked on the doors and said, hey, would you like to come in? There's such a religious country to begin with. Most of them are Catholic, and so that was a great way to meet people. Like, hey, we want to share a message about Jesus Christ, and they were like, yeah, come on in. And so just to have that feeling of being welcomed, I think really settled things down for me. I wasn't really sure what to expect. And so, but the Lima South mission in particular, there's so many things. There's Nazca, that's all the way the southern part of our mission. I believe it hits the northern part of Chile, if I'm not mistaken. And so Nazca it goes all the way up till the central part of Lima, so to speak. And then there's Ayacucho, which is kind of more inward into the country, which borders the Lima East, like the Cusco type mission. So, and the interesting part is, in one day you could be on the beach, and another day you could be in the mountains skiing within 24 hours. If you ever get sent to Ayacucho, it's a breath of fresh air. Nazca feels like you are literally living on the surface of the sun. In fact, I got a nickname, they called me Elder Camarón, as Elder Lobster, because I was beet red 24/7. 24/7. In fact, one area, I had to get permission to wear this, but it was like this big, huge circled hat that shaded me. The first time I got burnt, the very first area, because it was so sandy, the sun would just reflect off the sand and just double burn me. The pensionista is the kind of a sister that's a member of the ward that volunteers to cook for the missionaries every meal. So that's something different. You probably know about that, but and so when I got home, she's like, Elder, we gotta fix you up. So she cut, is it aloe vera? Aloe vera, that plant that grows, and slapped it on the back of my neck, and oh, that was the best feeling in the world. So if you ever get sent to Nazca, I'm sorry. But it's a great area, don't get me wrong, just temperature. I'm kind of particular about temperature. So, but Ayacucho, on the other hand, it's it's beautiful. You can be outside and the sun not burn you. That is a miracle. So, and there's tons of places to go in Ayacucho. In fact, it seems like every P day we went to a different place. There's monuments, there's waterfalls, there's hikes, there's tons of things to do. And then there's Lima. Lima is really interesting because when somebody says they're from Lima, you got to be way more specific because there's different districts they're called within Lima. And so we can come back to this later, but I wasn't a problem elder, but I had more crazy changes than I did regular changes on the mission. So I got to know Lima very well. So I started kind of at the southern tip of Lima, via Salvador. That's where all the sand and houses like that are. And then I moved into the, into the better part of Lima. It seems like the more centralized you go into Lima, the better things are. That's where the money is the central part of Lima. So if you go on the very, very outskirts of Lima, that's where I was. Now keep in mind that the church is fairly young in this country. Even though it's growing at a rapid rate, it's still really young. Some bishops and branch presidents mean well, but they sometimes don't mean to do things. And so in this particular case, the Surco bishop, when we showed up, he was just, I don't know, he was making sure that things were done that didn't really matter, and it was kind of taking away from the spirit of things. And so when we met with the bishopric for whatever that morning meeting is, we kind of brought that up to his attention, and how, like in our wards in the United States, this is kind of how we handled it, and that was my companion, and the bishop just straight up turned to me and asked, well, how do you treat it, elder? Like, he was such a humble man to understand truly how things should work, and principles and things like that. So I think it had something to do with the sacrament or something like that. But and so we were able to teach him, and he really helped the ward grow. And the attendance in the ward, the things with wards in Peru, it's really kind of interesting. The wards are huge. I mean, we're talking, I would say maybe 2,000 members in a single ward. However, the activity rate is very, very small. Whether it be the reason of them just straight up not going, or they moved or died, or the record keeping there isn't the best. Again, this was 10 years ago, so I'm sure it's changed. But and so when we showed up at a ward, one thing that I like to do, and I got this idea from another elder, is to print out a ward directory and just try to visit every single house on the ward directory. And that was an easy way to meet people. Like one time we knocked on the door and said, hey, is this guy here? And they're like, oh, he died like 6 years ago. So we were able to update it and also meet whoever was at that house again. And we were able to share the message, and it was just an easy way of meeting new people. So activity is fairly low, but there's tons of members in Peru, and I mean, hence the temples that are going up like crazy in Peru. I mean, there's branches that are made up of, geez, I don't know, 10, 15 people at times. You know, the further out you go, the smaller they get, it seems. One thing that was very powerful that didn't really click in my head until later in the mission was to teach lessons with members present. And so what I would try to do is whenever we'd have a lesson with an investigator, I would choose the closest semi-active member that I could find to that house and say, hey, we're actually just teaching this guy around the corner from your house. Do you want to come join us? And even the most simple testimony, they're like, well, you know, I don't know all the stuff that you know. Why do you need me? Well, I just need your testimony. And sometimes you could get some really spiritual experiences. You could just feel it in the room. Like it was one time I had it silent for a good 4 minutes. And that was the longest 4 minutes of my life, but we just soaked it in. And so I would say from the get-go, try to get as many members as you can involved with the lessons that you teach to investigators. As far as the content is concerned, I would say keep it as simple as possible. I tend to elaborate more than I should. And missionaries, now this is a general statement, but a lot of missionaries get fairly confident around the 9 to 12 month mark, to the point where they use scriptures more than they should, meaning, I don't want to call it Bible bashing, but they start to do stuff that they shouldn't do, I guess. And so try to keep things simple, like with testimonies, sticking to the lessons, using members, and just share the message, I guess, and have a lot of patience. In Peru, they have there's this thing called conviviente. I'm sure that's pretty common in South America, but it's like whatever that common law. If you live with somebody for so many years, you're practically married, quote unquote. And so teaching people the law of chastity is fairly hard, especially when somebody wants to get married, but you can't because they were born in some tiny little town that takes days and a lot of money to get your birth certificate from the municipalidad in order to get married. And if they can't do that, they can't get married, and if they can't get married, then they can't get baptized. So sometimes that happens. I had a lady that felt so strong about it, she found the money somehow and took like the 48-hour bus ride to her little town, got her birth certificate, came back and got married, and then got baptized. So the law of chastity, I think, is pretty big down there. So I served in from November of 05 to November of 07, and I served in so many places. There was Villa Salvador, Chincha twice, Villa Salvador twice. There was Lima Tambo. There was San Juan de Miraflores. There was Surco. I served in and Ayacucho. I served in almost every area minus Nazca. Thank goodness, because I know Nazca was really, really, really hot.
So when I served in the Trujillo mission, it was from 2008 to 2010, and at that time there were still only 7 missions in Peru, and now there are 13. I remember my mission, the farthest north it went was a little town called Chepén, and then the farthest south it went was a tiny town called Guarmey. And then we went into the Andes a little bit. There were 2 mission areas in the Andes, Cajamarca and Huaraz. But the majority of the mission was, majority of our zones were in the city of Trujillo itself and in a city called Chimbote. And there were zones in between there, but none of them were really large cities. And then Huaraz and Cajamarca as well. Those were larger cities where we had a few zones. I remember we had 3 districts in our mission. 3 districts in our mission, and it was our goal to have them develop into stakes, be strong enough to be organized as stakes and wards instead of districts and branches. By the end of my mission, we did. Huaraz became a stake, and Casa Grande became a stake. So 2 of those had grown sufficiently and had enough active membership and Melchizedek priesthood holders to support a stake and wards. It was phenomenal, and it was really enjoyable to do the work in those areas. Now there was one temple in Peru at the time, and then my first December there, so December 2008, they announced a second temple in Peru. It was the Peru Trujillo Temple, and it was amazing. The members were so delighted to hear that their temple service had been heard, that the need was real enough that a temple could be built there. We had to work really hard to keep the members going to Lima. It was a 13-hour bus ride, might have been 14, to get people down to Lima and attend the temple. But where you're in a country where financial means aren't necessarily a common thread with everybody. Everybody kind of fights to survive. It's kind of a poor country. It's often called the poorest rich nation in the world because so much of Peru's riches are owned by other nations and companies. And so a lot of the people, they eke out a living with what we would consider very meager here in the United States. But that doesn't shortchange them in any way. They were the most humble and the most faith-filled people I've ever met. They loved you for who you were. They loved the Lord. Whether they were members or non-members, most everybody believed in God. It was pretty amazing. Predominantly, Peru was Catholic. A lot of Spanish influence in that way from the conquistadors. It was very Catholic, at least on the coast. And there was a pretty strong representative from Jehovah's Witness. And there were a few evangelical groups. And there were a few religions that were exclusive to Peru. There was a group that called themselves the Israelites. That was a Peruvian religion, and they followed the law of Moses. They're very interesting people. The missionaries worked really closely with bishops and stake presidents, and they all reported back. They all reported back to our mission president. Well, we did. The stake presidents didn't have to. We reported back to our mission president, and we kept close tabs on not only everyone we were working with, but everyone we were trying to strengthen. And we worked really hard to never be a deterrent or a hindrance to the work within the wards themselves. The people were so willing to help out with us, so willing to work with the missionaries, to invite their friends and families into their homes. There was like no fear. We would go in to talk with the family and say, hey, would you mind inviting your neighbors over for a family home evening? And is it okay if we come? It's like, we'll teach the lesson. We'll even come up with a game. Would you mind hosting that and inviting them? And they'd be, sure, we love that. And they'd invite their friends, and their friends would show up. And they'd be like, hey, we see you guys walking over here all the time. Who are you? And we'd get the wonderful opportunity to introduce ourselves and the church and the gospel into these families' lives. Now, it didn't always result in people joining the church, but it always resulted in good feelings and good, strong bonds being built with their neighbors. And who knows, those seeds could have gone very deep and could have planted. And just, I was never in an area for a very long time. Good things could have easily happened from just the willingness and the goodness to serve other people. The culture within the church down in Trujillo is there are always activities going on at the church. We just want people to be there and to feel the Spirit as often as possible, so there are always intramural volleyball games and soccer games. We even had a basketball game once, which people don't play basketball down in Peru. They all play soccer. And we had parties, we call them mission nights. We pull people off the streets. We stand outside like, hey, we're having a movie that we're showing, and we'd show the Testaments, or To This End Was I Born, or Finding Faith in Christ. We showed church-made videos. We'd invite people in, and there would be members there waiting. And afterwards, we'd have refreshments, and we'd invite people just to have fun. And that generated a lot of interest in the church, and generated a lot of very spiritual conversations